morning. My name is Rich Jensen. I'm a volunteer tour guide here at the New England Air Museum. Welcome.
Good afternoon. My name is Eric Finn. I'm a Marine Corps veteran. I'm standing in front of the early model of the aircraft that I worked on in the Marine Corps as a plane captain. This is the A4A model. They're designated as D. The similarities and differences are immense. This aircraft was designed by Douglas Company. The designer was a gentleman named Ed Heineman, and the Navy requested a certain aircraft from him, and he decided not to give them what they asked for. He gave them this plane, which was half the size, half the weight, and they ended up accepting it in the late 1950s. This plane flew from the late 50s into the 2000s, and the rumor are they're still flying today. The last one rolled off the assembly line in 1979 at the McDonnell Douglas Company. It was exported to more than a dozen countries around the world. It has a great history. It served in Vietnam. It served, the Argentinians flew it in the Falkland Islands. The Israelis flew it in the Six-Day War. It's just an unbelievable aircraft. Right in front of you is the aircraft's 20mm cannon, which would be mounted here on the wing. There'd be one on either side and has a capability of 100 rounds per side. Underneath is a 300-gallon drop tank, carries fuel. The aircraft is capable of carrying 2 300-gallon drop tanks on each wing station. The later versions had 5 wing stations for carrying bombs, fuel tanks, rocket pods like this one right here, which is called the Zuni rocket pod. It also carried Sidewinder missiles, and it had the capability of a Shrike missile. The original was designed to carry a nuclear bomb on the center line, but it was a one-way mission, my understanding. This is the canopy release. The aircraft has an ejection seat. The canopy would blow off, then the pilot would fire himself out on the ejection seat. One of its claims is its slat system. Now, this is what's called a tricycle landing gear. So you have a nose wheel. This nose wheel on the ground is 180 psi. For aircraft carrier landers, 360 psi. 300 or so on the main, close to 500 for carrier landings.
What does PSI mean?
Pounds per square inch. In the Marine Corps and the Navy, we use nitrogen in the tires. In the Air Force, like this Phantom here, they use dried compressed air in their tires.
What is the purpose of that, do you know?
The purpose of either nitrogen or dried compressed air is when the aircraft flies above 10,000 feet, it still, and then it drops down to land, it still has air pressure in it. Because regular air out of a regular air compressor, it would lose all its air pressure and be landing with flat tires.
Something like Deflategate.
Something like Deflategate, right. This is the first model. So it has limited capabilities. It has a smaller engine. It's missing the in-flight refueling probe. It has a smaller canopy. And it has a limited flight capability as far as what it can carry. The Skyhawk's design is that it weighed 12,500 pounds, it could carry 12,500 pounds, roughly. So it carried its own weight. If this plane here, the earlier version, weighs 10,000 pounds, it can carry 10,000 pounds. That's between fuel and ordnance. The plane has 810-gallon fuel capability, not counting its drop tanks. It has a fuel bag behind the pilot and then fuel in the wings. So between the fuel bag and and the wings 810 gallons. That's on the E model. I'm just guessing on the A model.
How far do you think that would go?
Well, very rarely did we ever send a plane out with just 810 gallons. We always sent it out with an additional 400-gallon fuel tank in the center or additional 2 300-gallon drop tank. Basically, 810 gallons, because it's not measured in the cockpit under gallons, it's in pounds. So 810 gallons is roughly at 6 pounds per gallon, so it's roughly 5,200 pounds of fuel. With the adding 2 300-gallon drop tanks, brings it up to 9,600 pounds, max fuel load.
400 miles?
I would say roughly 300-400, but again, that wasn't my area of expertise.
When they landed, did they have to get rid of the tanks?
But they had to land with a limited amount of fuel in them because you don't want to stress the gear, all right? Now, the difference between this plane and this plane is the A4, its landing gear is set up and designed to take a carrier landing, whereas the Air Force model of the Phantom is not designed to land on an aircraft carrier. So it might not have the same type of gear capable of the stresses of a carrier landing. So this is the Air Force model of the Phantom. This is a single seat, single engine. 2-seater, twin engine, turbine. About, I'm guessing, 6,000 to 8,000 pounds of thrust. Combined, 20 to 25,000 pounds of thrust. I'm, just guessing. J79 turbine, J52. Pratt & Whitney.
Can you show me what's in the case from behind you, the display case?
So behind us is a model history of the different models of A4s that came out. This represents the A model, so would be here. So this is the first one, which they call the YA, the test one, and then this is the A model. So the differences so these basically are the same, but this is the final draw out. Then the next model is the B model. So the improvement on the B model would have been, it was given an in-flight refueling probe, which this one doesn't have. There are other improvements, which I'm not up on all of them. This is a more advanced, they're showing. So this is an L model, which was, I believe, was what was exported. It was an export model, the L. These two. This is the E model. This is the one I worked on. So the E model, its improvement was they bent to make it easier to in-flight refuel, so they bent the fuel probe. They gave it a bigger engine, and they gave it the avionics humpback for avionics gear. So this bird here weighed 12,500 and it carried 12,500 between fuel and ordnance. The next model, which is a discrepancy, so in order to get this aircraft started, you have to have 2 auxiliary units, one for electrical power and one to turn up the turbine, called it JTC-85 or GTC-85, gas turbine compressor. And the pilot would indicate to the person here to give it electrical power, so he checks all his gauges. On the other side of the plane is the person running the ground turbine compressor, the gas turbine compressor, and the pilot would signal him and he would turn it on, and through a hose it would give 40 psi of constant pressure, which will spin the turbine. Once the jet is spinning, the pilot watches the gauge, and when it gets to 15%, he moves the throttle up, hits the throttle to the left, engaging igniters, and then it lights off the engine. Doesn't always work that way. Sometimes they have what's called a hung start, or a false start, or a wet start. So the improvement was that the F model had, which eventually the M model, which is the last one, the M model, had a self-starter on it. It was mounted on the other side. So they only needed the electrical unit. They didn't need the GTC-85 to spin the turbine. The pilot could do it himself, and he could do it without the electrical unit, because once the engine is running, then he gets his electrical power. Then in between, there were two trainer models. You had they were called the TA4s. There was the J model, the F model. Then the Marine Corps requested a stretch on the fuselage to put another seat in on the M model, and they call it the OA4M, which was used for like an observation aircraft. That's what the O designation is. So it could be used like a forward air control aircraft if they wanted. The A4 was also flown by the Blue Angels for a long time. Their aircraft had everything stripped off of it so it could do all its fancy maneuvers and everything. And I don't know, other than to say that the aircraft, when it was first designed, was designed by a company called Douglas. Later on, it became McDonnell Douglas. So, and now McDonnell Douglas doesn't exist anymore. It's now part of either Boeing or Lockheed. I can't remember which one. I think it's Boeing. So, that's what I know about the A4. Very historic, almost as historic. I mean, this is another very historic aircraft, the Phantom. Both aircrafts are from the same era. This aircraft maximum speed around 650, 670, depending on what it's carrying. This is a Mach 2 performance aircraft next to me. But they both used a lot of fuel. I'm proud of my service. Couldn't have worked on a better aircraft. Gets it.